Welcome to the Art of Conversation with Noelle Mc Alinden, a series of authentic conversations with fellow artists and creatives and good friends in unique arts and cultural settings. Today I'm delighted to be revisiting Enniskillen Castle Museum with good friend Toni Johnson MBE, recently acknowledged for her contribution to arts, culture and education in this community. We reflect on the generous contribution of Toni and the Johnson family in gifting to Fermanagh District Council some of the artefacts created by Gordon Johnson, her late husband. For those of us who were privileged enough to meet Gordon Johnson and to know him, we can reflect upon his creativity, his imagination, and his giftedness as both an artist and an arts educationist, but most of all as an Imagineer ahead of his time. We reflect on just some of the generous donations that Toni and the Johnson family have made. We also meet Catherine Scott from Fermanagh District Council and reflect on some of the history and the heritage housed in this unique collection. Welcome to the Art of Conversation, celebrating our history, our heritage, our culture and our creativity all year round. So Catherine, it's great that we are here in the Enniskillen Castle Museum, and one of your many roles is really to do with learning and access in terms of education, and it's something that's very close to my own heart. Enniskillen Castle Museum is a very important, iconic building, no doubt, and also we were talking earlier about the importance of this in terms of experiential learning. I know that's something you're very passionate about.
Absolutely.
And also about the history of the island town as well. So would you like to explain a little bit more about where we actually are,
Sure.
in the context of this space?
Of course, Noelle. And it's lovely to have you here as well, Noelle. It's lovely that while the sort of museum and the castle is closed, we can offer people an insight as to what is here. And I suppose you touched on some of the most important things about Enniskillen Castle, about the museum, and also I think too about the role of a museum. It's not just a building, it's not just displays, it's not just artefacts, it's how we interpret those artefacts and how we make those artefacts accessible, not just to children in terms of our education, but to anybody who might be interested, who maybe is a visitor to the town, maybe comes from Enniskillen and now lives away, or really anybody who has an interest in the history of Enniskillen and of Fermanagh.
And also lifelong learning. I mean, this really is a source and stimulus for learning from literally early years right through, and I will expand a little bit more on the friends of the museum and the purpose of that.
I suppose in many ways everything that we have within the museum and the different buildings here on site, they're all, for want of a better word, they're all resources. So too are the people, of course, that we have within the museum. And I'm in a position, I'm very lucky, I've been in this post now for 20 years almost, and during that time have built very strong relations with schools, with community groups, with nursing homes. So in February next month we will be doing a number of storytelling sessions strictly for under fives. We will also be doing storytelling sessions for older people through the Southwest Partnership. So I suppose I'm very lucky because we do our standard school programmes, which although formal are informal in the way in which we conduct them. So in all of the programmes which we have, none of the children in any of them are asked to lift a pen. And I suppose that is our way of being slightly different from being in that formal school context. We have artefacts, and the artefacts by and large come from that period, so they are contextual. So for example, if a school group is coming in to do the Second World War, all of the handling collection in the Anderson shelter will date from the late 1930s or will date to the 1940s. If we're doing rationing with them from the Second World War, we bring them in here, we bring them down to the shop where we have a ledger from Anderson shop from 1937, and it's a fascinating object. It is something you could spend weeks, if you had weeks to spend, going through, and really lets us see what people in Enniskillen could actually buy in 1937. So tin spaghetti, cherries, all sorts of things that we might think that little exotic. Bananas are not an issue to get at all, and all kinds of commodities now that the brand names have been lost. The other hugely sort of interesting thing which normally sparks the interest of children is just how literally everybody was buying cigarettes and obviously a box of Swan matches to go with it. So from my perspective, I suppose the beauty of my job in many ways is that I can take it right through from early years Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4 as well. I've done some work recently with Queen's Archaeology and the students there, right through to reminiscence groups and nursing homes. One of the things that we did during lockdown, which really was, I'm not going to say a labour of love, but was written with love, was the new walk around the Meadow, just along the water's edge here outside the castle, and runs between here and the Lakeland Forum. Now the beauty of that really was that we have this really open, accessible path there, but the area has so much history and so much resonance with people who live locally, whether they used it to walk along, to play football, whether it's where their first romance was, whether they associated with boating. So there are a number now of signal posts or little signs that you can decide to swing open and read, and hopefully it will be a prompt to you and whoever you're with, maybe to make you think about a time along the Broad Meadow. One of the things that was really important in doing it was that it was not an historical walk per se, but a reminiscent walk or a reminiscence walk, and there is a difference. So if we're trying to think about those key things that people who may be suffering from dementia hold on to, they will hold on to nursery rhymes, they will hold on to perhaps poems that they've learnt as children, they will hold on to tunes, to ditties. So along the Meadow there are a lot of You Shall Have a Fishy and a Little Dishy, the Magpie poem, all of those things are there, trying to make it as accessible to people as possible and as welcoming. The other side of it is, of course, if you want to ignore them, you can ignore them. They're in no way obtrusive. They're single little posts, and if you want to look at them, you can. So I suppose in many ways I'm blessed with having the longevity of my post here has allowed me to develop those relationships with early years groups, with schools, and with the nursing homes, and also people within the wider community, so that it becomes less of a task, or it becomes actually very easy for me to attract an audience into the museum, when very often they're coming back to me, they know I'm here, they know the resources that we can provide. And of course the other thing that we're always willing to do, if somebody has something specific that they want us to look at, something bespoke for them over a period of months, whatever it might be, maybe reflective of funding that they have, then we can accommodate that too.
And I suppose that point as well about being a shared heritage. I mean, I know you go to great lengths to make sure that you make it much more accessible for all ages and stages in life. And I'm curious about this map here behind us, Catherine. Do you want to tell us a little bit about it?
So the model here of Enniskillen as it was in 1834 is really fabulous. And for those of us, and there are many of us, and you mightn't think about it, but for those of us who are visual learners, then this is just an absolute gem. And what it does, I would use it in education programmes when we're maybe looking at the history of the back streets, so that allows us to look at the history of the First World War, perhaps also when we are looking at the plantation of Ulster, because what it really does is it demonstrates and illustrates really clearly, number one, that Enniskillen is an island town. Number two, how it sort of developed along this one singular thoroughfare from sort of the east to the west of the island, and in many ways is almost a blueprint plantation town with those key obligated buildings dotted along the island. So what is now St McCartan's Cathedral on the highest hill, what is now the town hall, would have been the market house in the diamond of the town itself, are all there and very clear to see. And the land use and how it developed over the centuries can be discussed. It's lovely in many ways because it's 1834, there's no Coles Monument. You can see the star-shaped fort, there's no railway station, but of course those things changed and evolved in the landscape of Enniskillen. So when we're looking at it now retrospectively, we can say this is how it was before and how that landscape changed. And I suppose that's key in this notion of landscape, and it allows us to see how Enniskillen has evolved and changed, but more importantly in many ways, it allows us to see how Enniskillen has stayed the same. There is a beautiful continuity in the landscape and in the layout of the buildings There's a beautiful continuity in terms of the landscape of the town and those key buildings that really afford us a beautiful skyline that hasn't changed at all. I suppose it's very difficult in terms of areas of Enniskillen to say which I love the most. I love a lot of Enniskillen. If you were to force me, I'd say the Fort Hill. The Fort Hill is a beautiful, absolutely beautiful, in many ways hidden gem in Enniskillen. Of course, it's off the island of Enniskillen. And everybody thinks of Coe's Monument. There's scaffolding all around Coe's Monument at the moment. It's being restored, it's being brought back to its former glory, as is the statue of Gilbraith Laurie Cole at the very top, at the pinnacle which overlooks the town of Enniskillen. And the Fort Hill was laid out for the second time and then reopened in 1892. And it was seen very much by the chairman of the town commissioners at that stage, a gentleman called Thomas Plunkett, that the people of Enniskillen needed a place, as you know, it was put in those beautiful sort of Victorian terminology, they needed a place to promenade. So we have gorgeous photographs of fantastic Victorian prams or perambulators around the bandstand. And if you were to ask me at a push to pick maybe my favourite architectural feature in Enniskillen, it might not be a building, it might just be the bandstand at the Fort Hill. The acoustics in the bandstand are fabulous. Again, this is what I mean about contextual learning. You bring children into the bandstand, you speak to them, get them to shout, and of course their voices echo and sound much louder than if we're standing outside. And what will happen then early in the new year, if all goes according to plan, the Fort Hill will reopen, the paths will have been made much safer, wider in places. Obviously, we're very keen that it's accessible for families, and I will continue to, hopefully COVID allowing, have my 2 family fun days there. So there's always one on Easter Monday, and there is always one the last Saturday, Friday or Saturday in July, depending on how the calendar falls. So it's a gorgeous spot in Enniskillen, one which is maybe underutilised because of its inaccessibility in terms of cars, but one which I would suggest to people is one that deserves to be discovered and deserves to be loved. Part of the redevelopment would also see a new tree trail around the Fort Hill, which is very much, again, a family orientated activity, which will be safe even when the park reopens, whatever the COVID restrictions might be. And that's the beauty of it. It's outside, it's huge, it's large, and it's safe.
And I know that we will have an opportunity to see the wonderful work of Gordon Johnson, model maker and art educationist, an absolute genius.
Yes.
And we'll have a chance and opportunity to which I'm looking forward to talk to Tony, his wife, and again an excellent example of somebody who's actively engaged in promoting the arts and as an arts activist as well. But I suppose I'm curious as well about not only the artefacts that you have here. Obviously some have been donated, some have been purchased because of their value. And then I'm also very aware then that there have been, you've recreated contexts through models to try and explain and I suppose educate.
Yeah, we have all of those things. One of the key learning aids that we would have within the museum, and key for all interpretation, we have a number of models that were made some years ago by Gordon Johnson. So we have one that depicts the Neolithic landscape here in County Fermanagh, one which depicts then the first farmers, another which shows how a crannog has been made, and another beautiful one of a medieval Maguire banquet, and also one actually of a burial at Achnaglack, which is a dual court tomb out near Ballintempo Forest towards Balcoo. And again, I suppose it's similar to the map because it affords people that accessibility in terms of understanding. There's no text to read. It is a joy, it is a beauty to look at the work that has gone into these models. The eye to detail that Gordon Johnson put into these models is phenomenal, down to the facial features of people who are featured within the models. We know, for example, if you look at the model across in the Castle Keep, that when he made it, he based the faces of the people at the model, in the model, on people who worked in the museum. So there is a striking sort of similarity between some of the people who were at this medieval Maguire banquet in the late 16th century and people who worked in Enniskillen Castle Museum in the 1990s. And I think the more you learn about the models, the more you learn about the man and the amount of interest that he put into the work that he did.
The resources that you provide here for teaching and learning as well. And I'm reminded too, and I know we'll get a chance to speak to Tony about this as well, I'm reminded of a particular event that was organised. Tony and a number of our colleagues organised it in Enniskillen High School at the time with a museum in Fermanagh Woods time, and it was a medieval banquet.
We have photographs.
And it was out of this world.
Yes.
Where we had to dress up in costumes.
Were there horses at that?
No, there weren't horses, but the students.
There's one there were horses, right?
The students participated in the role play, and it was living learning.
Yeah.
You know, and it was as you mentioned earlier on, the importance of experiential learning, and to actually connect with their past and their history and their heritage.
Well, I mean, we still do that. The medieval banquet that Tony would have been involved in, from having seen photographs, and I think there might even be a bit of footage of it, involved all kinds of really large-scale living history. Now, we can't do that on a daily basis when school groups come into us, but what we can do is we can try to recreate elements of medieval life, or elements of life as it would have been when the Maguires lived here at Enniskillen Castle. And obviously what we don't have any huge number of any real artefacts from that period, but we have the castle. And what the castle allows us to do is probably, in my mind, one of the most important, one of the key ways of delivering any education, and that is contextual learning. If I am going to talk to a group of children about a castle and how a castle is built, what the stones look like, what the windows look like, what the different sort of architectural features of a castle look like, where better to do that than in a castle? It allows them, and this is something I love doing with children, it allows them to read the building. So they will arrive and I will say, what do we ordinarily read? And they will say, a book. And I will say, well, by the time you're going back to school at lunchtime, you're going to know how to read a building, and how reading a building and looking at a building will tell you about the function of a building. So we're really lucky in that we have the castle, that we have also the models that were made first by Gordon, and then we will have a recreation on a smaller scale of a medieval banquet. The children will also get a chance to use quills, and we will talk to them about the monks at Liskeard Abbey, and this allows us then to talk to them about the writings in the Annals of Ulster. So there are so many ways that just a little lateral thinking allows us to explore so many facets of the history in County Fermanagh. And of course, Enniskillen Castle isn't the only castle in County Fermanagh. We are blessed. If the sun is shining, it's a beautiful day. Even if it's not, it's really easy to get into the car, or you could walk to Batora, in County Fermanagh and drive to Tully or drive to Meadow, drive out as far as Balleek. There are some absolutely beautiful castles. And again, this is where there is a link with the landscape. You know, the landscape of Tully, the landscape around Meadow, I would defy you in many instances to find somewhere more beautiful. And it brings us back to a time in the early 17th century when those planters come to Enniskillen. They're granted an area of land and they then proceed to build what are really strong houses, but what we refer to as castles. And obviously the plantation of Ulster and the castles in County Fermanagh is very much the last wave of any castles being built across the United Kingdom. And they're hugely important in terms of, if you like, footprints. Those footprints on our landscape that tell us about the past, that tell us about who lived there, that tell us perhaps maybe, you know, how they weren't always welcome, but how that has evolved and changed over hundreds of years, and how really those castles, the development of the town, all of those things are interlinked in terms of the 17th century history of County Fermanagh, and how all of that history has proceeded forward right up to the 21st century.
You have made it your business to dedicate a number of opportunities for children and young people and their families to make use of that park.
Yes, so, twice a year. Yeah, we have Easter Monday, which won't be happening, and then the last Friday in July as part of Love Parks Week. So we've been doing that now for 10, 11 years, and we're up to about 2,000 people come along to a family event, which coincidentally grew out of a Young Friends of Fermanagh County Museum project with me.
There's the Friends of Fermanagh County Museum, and then there's the
So some years ago we had the Young Friends of Fermanagh County Museum, and they met every Thursday afternoon and would have come down to the castle to meet with me. We organised various events. We actually organised a concert here, and they were key fundamentally in the first event that we had in the Fort Hill Pleasure Park, as I always smile when I say. So they were a fundamentally important group of youngsters who came and obviously evolved over a number of years. And then in 2014, I was approached by the teacher in St Michael's College who had been running a peace studies project with what is now URG's Enniskillen Royal Grammar School since the early 1970s. And would I be interested in helping them to facilitate that programme to run on? And I'm delighted to say, COVID and everything considered, we have continued to do that from 2014. So we have looked very strictly, just in a way, 100 years back. So the beginning of the war, 1914, 1915, 1916, so we're looking at the Easter Rising, 1917, 1918, the rise of Sinn Féin. Then we look at, obviously, the rise of the suffragettes. And then, obviously, at 2020, we are looking at the creation of the state of Northern Ireland. And it's a wonderful opportunity for, I'm going to say, youngsters, young adults really, to come together who might not otherwise have an opportunity to meet each other. Although I think this year there's a slight change in that dynamic, in that a lot of them seem to know each other before they arrived down to the castle. They're busy contacting each other in terms of messaging before they're even here. And in a way, there's such a fantastic, refreshing element to that, in that they know who they already are, and we're just then enhancing the relationship that they already have. So that's another element, another really important demographic to have within the museum sector, to give them that key grounding in heritage and in history, and again looking at it in a more informal but structured parameter.
And I suppose, Catherine, there's a workhouse as well.
So I've been involved in the Enniskillen Workhouse project now really for, well, initially I suppose 10 or 12 years, but I'm delighted to say it's coming to an end. It's coming eventually to its fruition. So the Workhouse in Enniskillen actually opens its doors in 1844. And one of the huge areas of interest which I have is the famine, and the famine in Enniskillen, the famine in Fermanagh, and the famine in Ireland. And I think, again, like the castle allows us to talk about the medieval period in Ireland, the workhouse is that tactile, in place learning tool. It is more than a building, it is more than the fabric, it is more than bricks and mortar. It is all about the people who walk through the front door. 1845 to 1849, during those years of the Great Famine, 10,000 people walked through the front door of Enniskillen Workhouse. And of those 10,000, 2,010 die, so a fifth, which academic research shows is representative of the number of people in those 4 years who died in the workhouse system. Now, throughout Ireland, there were 131 workhouses before the famine. They were built before it, they were not built because of it, and they were not built as a vehicle to deal with it. But in essence, for many people, those 3 million people in Ireland solely dependent on the potato, they became very much the vehicle by which they tried to cope. If they didn't immigrate, they tried to cope through these very difficult years. So obviously when the Erne Hospital was built, the main body of Enniskillen Workhouse was demolished, and the main body was huge. It was built to house 1,000 people. I mean, that's an incredible number of people. And the people immediately going into the workhouse would have been separated and segregated, dependent on gender, on age, and also any infirmity or any what we would now call psychiatric issues. In those days, they were referred to as idiots or lunatics. Incredibly, if you look at the admission records for Enniskillen Workhouse, they actually make a distinction between curable lunatics and those lunatics that are not curable. So it's fascinating for me in so many ways. It tells us the history of the famine. It tells us much about the architecture of the time. And then if we bring it right up until 1948, when the workhouse systems closed with the introduction of the NHS after the Second World War, it gives us such an insight into societal norms and how people who had, for whatever reason, been dispossessed of all they had, and I mean dispossessed whether that be financially or even maybe in terms of their family, or people maybe suffering from psychiatric issues in old age, orphaned, young pregnant mothers, whatever the scenario that they found themselves in, that they ended up in the workhouse. And it's hugely important to me that those voices are heard, and that those voices are heard loudly. And by restoring the workhouse, which we are doing through Heritage Lottery funding, and creating a heritage space within the workhouse, retaining the stone floors, retaining the fireplaces, putting the bell back into the workhouse, physically providing those voices in the workhouse will allow the stories of those people to be told, because stories like that are precious and should not be lost.
How long are you in your current post?
That's a question that sometimes frightens me. How long have I been here? When I'm doing education programmes, sometimes the children will say to me, "Do you live in the castle, Catherine?" And my immediate answer sometimes is like, I kind of feel like I do. I've been here now almost 20 years. And when my post started, I was doing all kinds of different things in terms of accessioning artefacts, working on the photographic archive, which I did solidly for 2 years. I then worked between here and Cavan on an outreach project, developing 6 heritage trails, linking those elements of our shared history pre-partition. In terms of my post at the moment then, how long have I been education officer? I'm going to say 14, 15 years. And the longevity of the post then really, as I said earlier on, has afforded me the opportunity to build great working relationships with the community, with schools, with the friends of the museum, with all sorts of users of the heritage that we have here within Enniskillen Castle Museums. And I suppose post-COVID, post-lockdown, it's a hard one to judge. I think people, we know during lockdown obviously, have been out using the broad meadow, have been visiting those plantation castles, have been using the new guided walk along the Wide Awake Way at Cornagrade and Kilmacormac. I would like to think that hopefully post-COVID and when restrictions lift properly, that we will somehow consciously or even subconsciously manage to dovetail the beauty of both of those things, that we will continue to make the most of our gorgeous landscape in Enniskillen and in County Fermanagh, and we will also then come back to places like the museum, places like the theatre, use our library more, all of those things which are really important in terms of our development and allowing us to think not only outside the box, but to allow us to imagine that there isn't a box. So that post-COVID, I suppose we take from that what we can, we learn from that what we can, and we move on and hopefully are able to enjoy the Fort Hill come the end of July. You know.
Brilliant, Catherine. Thank you very, very much.
Pleasure, Noelle.
So, Catherine, we're going to meet Toni Johnson, who's a very good friend and a member of the Friends of Fermanagh County Museum as well. And this is a very special exhibit here. And do you want to say a little bit before we talk to Toni?
Absolutely. Toni knows how much I love the shop, and Toni and I have done several joint sessions
we have
together
indeed.
in the shop for age-friendly events, and also with children, and also for culture night. And this is the best. I suppose you're talking about creating a context, but this is the real thing. You know, my colleague and I, Sinead, first saw this in its sort of second home rather than its first home.
Yes.
Up with Toni and Gordon before it found its new home here.
We had it at the end of Gordon's workshop. We had it as an office to be a little bit different. Then it turned into a bar, but then it turned back into a shop again.
And Sinead and I went to see it, and I remember, and Sinead's really diligent and was so keen to have it exactly as it was, and had photographs of it as it was with yourself.
Absolutely,
yes. So then, when we brought it down to the museum, everything was placed in terms of just exactly where it is in the shelves. So it's fabulous. You could talk about it a lifetime to children, to old people, to absolutely everybody, who will recognise Bisto or Oxo or what is Hacks.
They were being filmed one day in here, and there was quite a crowd of people watching it. And the guy that was doing the presentation said, "Well, what would you call this shop?" So I said, "Well," and a girl from the back said, "Oh, look, I mind my nana sending me out for packets of that." And I said to her, "Where are you?" And she said, I'm standing at my nana's back door, and I said it's a shop of memories, and it's lovely because it is. People, oh, I remember them, and then they say things like, "See that salt? That's the same now," and then they tell the children, "See that salt? That's been for years and years, been like that." But it's lovely, and the children on culture night, we do a special thing with them, and the children come along, and we have a box of old money. And we have sweets, and I buy the sweets, the old-fashioned sweets, which include licorice pipes.
Okay.
Now, people don't have licorice pipes these days. Yeah, absolutely, from my sources, yeah. And we have the proper little paper bags, the kind you poured things in, and then you threw them, twisted them over. But the children come, and then I say to them, right, that will cost you 2p, twopence. And they look and they said, "Isn't it?" And they said, "Oh yes, there is. Find a 1p." And so that's a real learning experience for them. And they find the 1p, and then they get the 2. And if they get it right, they're allowed to come in here, and then they're allowed to go over, and I hope this is working, it might not be, and ring it up on there. And they love it. And the little ones have a stool so they can do it. But it nearly knocks them out when they do it. And then they put the money in.
Was this yours as well?
Oh yes, this came with it.
Oh my goodness. So Tony, we know each other since 1983.
Oh my goodness. Right,
and
yes.
I remember when I first came to teach here in Enniskillen, in Fermanagh, you and Gordon were so kind and so generous. And I remember being at your home for many parties.
Indeed.
Creative beyond doubt. And I'm really intrigued to see your generosity in gifting this to the museum. I mean, everything from this stunning register to this as well. I mean, all of that. I mean, what exactly is this?
Well, this is the ledger. This is how people used to do their offices in the shops. Now, what there was, which isn't gone up yet, but it is going to go up, you would come into the shop, and across over me here, there would be these wires.
I remember those.
Right.
Yes.
And a thing to pull.
Yes.
And you would come in and you would ask for something, and would unscrew this little thing and put in what it was and how much it was, screw it back up, pull this, and it shot into an office. Only one lady had to be there to look after all of the money. So that's why it's an emporium. It's only me needs to be here, because they just take the things and you don't have to go off and do anything for them. So it was fascinating. And we collected things for the shop because Gordon went to a lot of sales because of the other things, the imaginative things he made. When he went to the sales, at the end of sales, as people will well remember, there was a box of sundry goods. And it contained all of this.
Yes.
Stuff that people couldn't throw away because maybe they didn't have bin men coming to collect. Old bottles, old tins, they just fired them all into a box. And Gordon would buy it for £1. So he would then come home. Quite a lot of the stuff wasn't any good. But amongst it, there were these. And I remember him saying once about the cigarette packets. He said, you know, they're beautiful. There was one particular one, I think it was the Woodbine one, which is lovely. I can't open that at the moment, but the Woodbine one's really artistic and beautiful. And he said, those will all go. And they went like that. And so we have this collection. So.
And of course, I mean, both of you were art and design teachers.
Yes.
That's how I first got to know you.
Indeed.
And it was interesting because Gordon's attention to detail took him into model making.
Absolutely.
Into a time when he decided then to give up his teaching and to go full time. So your partnership and connection with this museum has been for many, many years. So it was no coincidence that Gordon came and worked here and created so many gorgeous models as well.
No, the first models he made when Helen was here, Helen Lanigan Wood was here, and he made the first models there when he kind of went professional, because it was fairly difficult when he decided, I'm leaving and I'm going to be a model maker. I mean, you know, and
at that stage, you had 4 children?
We had 4 children, and I was working, and I remember him coming in one day, and he was getting hardly any money at all. And he came in one day, and he'd been on the phone, and he said, oh, right, that's another job. And I said, what is it? And he said, there's a lady from Lisnaskea wants me to make a lady in a crinoline pointing to the left. And I said to him, how much are you getting for it? And he said, £35. And I said, right, that's it. You have to go down on Monday morning, it was weekend, and go to the dole office and sort yourself out.
Yeah.
Because I can't do this. And
Yes.
we're rearing 4 children and
Yes.
working for. Anyway,
Yes.
there was a terrible, tense weekend, as you can imagine. And on the Monday following that, he had a phone call from a very well-known firm of architects. And the guy said, I have looked at your models in the museum. He'd done 2 in there.
Yes.
And he said, I love the way you personalise them. He said, I think your stuff is brilliant. And he said, we need a model of the council offices in Derry, down at the quays, and I want a tall ship in front of it. And he said, there are 77 windows, can you do it? And he said, yes. And then after the phone call, he sat down, he said, I hope I can. I said, well, I hope you can too. But that was it.
Yeah.
That was takeoff. So then he was getting, it was Malarkey, the architect.
Yes.
And they got very friendly. And I mean, from then it took off. But he still always loved doing extraordinary things.
Tony, I'm particularly drawn to this. This is your home, in effect?
Yes, we have a big yard, and that was
Yes.
Gordon's workshop.
And Gordon, even when he was teaching, he was creating so many different models.
He was.
You know, in some cases actually from the students as well.
Oh yes, yes. And the students also made the models too. He had a lot of them doing 3-dimensional work. But what he would do is cast the faces of some of the girls in the school, so that he used them on different models. He would get models from shops and use the shop models.
Yeah, the mannequins. Yes.
And then he would put somebody's face on. So there are 2 girls in the town hall that he did for one of the models, which is now up in Derry. And I mean, they looked like of course they were then when they were girls. And in the Butter Market where he has Myrtle the train, then there are also the 3 people are recognisable. You know, they really are the people that they were modelled from.
And of course, we'll get a chance to see Myrtle.
We will.
Myrtle is an exquisite sculptural, kinetic piece of sculpture that Gordon created, and you've gifted that as well to the council, and it's currently exhibited in the Butter Market in Enniskillen.
So I think it's it's important. He would have loved the fact that a lot of stuff went to the museum, but it's very important, the kind of living museum idea.
Yes.
I think it's so important. We did the medieval banquet, I think you were talking about that earlier.
Yeah.
But a lot of things could be done, and you could have on culture night, you could have a Victorian night. You know, there's so much here that you can link in with and think kids would love that.
Well, you see, I'm very aware, Tony, your role as an educator, not just as head of art and design in Enniskillen High School, but also but also as head of pastoral care, and I know how important the arts and creativity are to you. You know, you and I both come from the same school of thought in terms of, irrespective of age or stage in life, when you get involved in creative pursuits, it is just it's a great experience. It's great for your health. And that's why we have a long history working together in terms of festivals here.
Yes.
And we only just last week did a Jerusalem with a local charity.
Indeed, yes, of course, yes.
Just outside the museum as well, coming soon. But certainly I have huge and beautiful memories, Tony, of the many parties that you would have had in your house that were all themed. I remember for your Ruby wedding anniversary. Yes. The red party. I remember the medieval banquet.
We had the straw party, because that was the Wicker Man party.
Yes.
Because for Jim Ledwith, Gordon made all the models for Jim Ledwith's place. And there's another amazing thing that we have in Fermanagh and rarely talked about, but it's absolutely incredible.
The Mummers Heritage Centre.
And yes, indeed. And yes, they were always themed. The first parties that we had, people didn't really know about going fancy dress. We did, because we come from art college.
And you both met at art college?
We did, yes. Yeah,
and am I right in thinking you both have the same birth date?
We do.
The same birth, 31st?
Yes. 23rd of May.
23rd of May.
Yes, but he was 3 years older than me.
I mean, that's really unique.
I know it is. It's very strange. But so we had parties, and the first party we had, only about 2 people came in vague fancy dress, and of course we were done up like goodness knows what, and a couple of people went home and made an effort and came back again. Then after that they realised that this was going to be a real party. I mean, we had jumping over the fire at the Wicker Man. We had one of the parties where we did archery, and we had all sorts of things.
I do recall a real spit. I do recall the
roasted a pig.
Yes,
correct.
All of that, and a jester.
Yes. And all our kids loved it. You see, they all came home, and now they come and they bring their families. But we haven't had any more parties, not since Gordon left us, because it's not quite the same.
No.
It was better when we were all together.
But the lovely thing is that Gordon's legacy lives on through this experience.
Absolutely.
And also too, you are going to be launching a bursary soon.
Yes.
Called the Imagineer.
Called the Imagineer of the Year, yes.
The Imagineer of the Year. So what's your thinking behind that,
Well,
Toni?
when Gordon made the train, he made it out of all sorts of bits and pieces. Now, most of the models in the museums are so small that you can't really use bits and pieces, but anything big that he made, he used beds, gates, bolts, everything. But he used his imagination. So I thought it would be lovely to have something for the children from him, for the children of Fermanagh, and I thought Imagineer of the Year would be good. And we're going to make a trophy. Colin, who works in the museum here and who really took over and made Gordon's train work again.
Yes, he invested a lot of time. And
absolutely, he was absolutely wonderful. Couldn't have done it without him at all. And he also did it as Gordon would have done it.
Yes.
Which was lovely. And he is going to make the trophy using various bits and pieces. And there will be a big trophy and 3 small trophies, so that the first 3 people that get it will have one to keep. But the big one will be the special one. And we were hoping to launch it last year, and then something got in the way last year.
COVID?
Yes, could have been COVID, And we just got the train out before we got Myrtle.
It was a wonderful launch.
Yes, and we had a great launch, and everybody dressed up, all the kids dressed up, and I think it was lovely. I love the dressing up thing. I love the idea of that. I think it really puts it in place.
It does.
But anyway, so that will be a nice thing to have, and it will be a bursary, and it will be for children using their imagination. We had to think carefully about what year, and we decided we wouldn't do it in A-level year.
Okay.
Because it's too specific, A-level.
And not every child goes on to do A-level.
Exactly. So we would do it when they were doing their GCSE.
Perfect.
And see how they get on. So it'll be absolutely fascinating.
And Toni, you have been a member of the Friends of the museum for how many years now?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
So what's the purpose? What's the purpose of
the purpose is, if any exhibitions are coming up or anyone has suggestions for them, then that's what happens at the meetings. You talk about things.
Yes.
And you talk about, if you want someone to talk, say you wanted to take William Scott, people would say, well, who would be the best person? And you would say, oh, so-and-so would know about that.
Yeah, so you'd be looking at experts.
Yes, you would be looking at expertise. And also people's ideas from other places, because people travel about and they see things and they think, oh, that would work. Yeah,
because you have an annual trip. Normally you have a trip at least once a year.
We do indeed. And we went to the Seamus Heaney Museum. And they go to all sorts of places. And it's just a nice group. And it works very well because it means that you're involved. So many of those kind of groups, you're not really involved. It's only the top 2 people.
Well, it's a support network for the museum.
Absolutely.
But people who are passionate about continuing the legacy of this place.
And absolutely.
And people like yourself. I mean, Toni, this was not only a very, very generous thing to do, but it must have been emotionally a difficult thing to do.
Well, in fact, it wasn't, because I didn't want it to just fall apart.
Yes.
And there's only me at home, and when the children come, of course, they're there. But I thought nobody sees it anymore.
Yeah.
So it's better to have it seen.
So it's celebrated here.
Gordon was dying to have that done. Yeah. Anyway, and he wanted the train to go into town too. But anything like that, I think, is important. And every time I keep finding things. At the weekend, I found, where did I put it? Oh yeah, I found mustard powders. I found in the house, which I have no idea what you do. I'm certainly not going to do them, but it says on it. It's I think when you have fits or something. I'm not too sure.
Okay.
But you wet it and you put it on your body somewhere. Okay. I'm not doing it, but I mean things that we used. I think it's lovely to have things like that. And people come along, and the lovely thing is that they see things, and they say, "I've got this at home," and the next thing they come to Sarah and bring things. And there's loads of stuff that I didn't bring here that have been brought in.
I know.
So it's important.
It is important.
One other lovely thing I have to tell you about when the children come, a lot of grandparents bring children. And it's lovely because they stand there with the children come up, they do their thing, you see, and the granddads look in and then they say, licorice pipes. Oh, I remember licorice pipes. And so the granddads get all the licorice pipes. The children get the jelly babies.
Yes.
But the granddads get the licorice pipes.
And it's lovely too, Toni, because I know all of your 4 children and your extended
And
family
grandchildren,
and
yeah.
grandchildren. There is that creative gene inherited.
Oh yes,
you know,
yeah,
by,
definitely.
of
Yes,
you.
Rachel is a painter. Yes,
Yes, and
she's
an
an
art
artist
therapist.
and an art therapist. And yes, and they
Katie's
all paint
teaching,
and they all draw.
and
yes.
of course,
Jason
writes
as
well, and then Matthew
and his son
work.
is brilliant at art as well.
And of course, you've been taking to Zoom
I
to
have.
teach your art classes.
I have indeed.
A lady moving with the times.
Taking one, I had to do it on WhatsApp because I wasn't clever enough to do Zoom. But we did a storyboard yesterday which contained the first question. Sean took over, he's 10, as the teacher yesterday. And the first thing he said to me was, the first picture is Abraham Lincoln's grandmother. And I said, why? He said, Nana, Abraham Lincoln's grandmother, all right? So I had to draw Abraham Lincoln's grandma. I hadn't a clue. I gave her a beard. But there was all sorts of things. And then we had to make a story up about it afterwards.
Yes.
But it was lovely. It was a nice thing to do. And the little girl is great at dancing and things. She wasn't there because she'd gone back to school. But they do. And the children love coming down here and seeing this. And they also love, he has a lot of work. There's 26 models in the Ulster Folk and Transport Museum in Belfast. And when the children go down there, they go around, they're very proud and seeing everything.
Of course. So Toni, this is one of my favourite pieces by Gordon. This is Myrtle, that you have gifted to Fermanagh District Council. And we're here in the Butter Market in Enniskillen, where you've had it housed safely for the public to enjoy. And on the hour, every hour,
yes,
the bell rings.
Indeed, it's going to be the new town clock.
Okay, lovely idea.
Yeah, well, Gordon always wanted it in the town because he felt the link with the railways apart from anything else. So I'm really pleased that we actually have her here. And I mean, she's amazing, really. I quite miss her because there are quite a lot of bits of history on her. She came about because Rachel was doing a course in Cork, and we went down to see her, and she said to Gordon, there's a man down here I know, he has a set of iron wheels, do you want them? And Gordon said, yes, of course I do. And so she said, okay, and so we went to collect these and had to bring them home. That was these ones here. It was extremely heavy and the car was practically on its back wheels coming home. And then halfway up, as we were coming home, he said, I think I'll build a train, and he did.
And why Myrtle? Why Myrtle?
Well, a lot of it is to do with the collegiate. Obviously, he was teaching art in the collegiate, and it was in the 70s. And in those days, when he was doing any modelling or anything, he used to do photographs and drawings of the girls. And these girls are actually students.
These are students, because I recognise Jane and Elaine.
This is Jane, and Elaine is over there, and there Sandra is at the back, and that is Sandra's Sinfonia. That is there, which is a bowron that she hits with collegiate hockey sticks.
Okay.
Now, you see the collegiate now, the uniform has changed, the school has gone.
Yes.
And sadly, it'll be part of social history.
It is a social history piece. I mean, I remember the launch of this.
Yes.
I remember it for several reasons, because the engine of this is part of a wheelchair that was gifted to Gordon.
Yes. All the part up at the front here. Gordon wanted it to go without you seeing anything except the girls.
Okay.
And this lived in our workshop in Drumclay, and we had lines out, and he wanted it to come out through the doors with nobody visibly pushing it or doing anything.
Yes.
He wanted it to actually work.
Yes.
So in fact, he sat in here, and when you open this here, you can open this, and he's in here.
I remember.
Yeah.
I remember. Yeah.
And he's in there, and his legs stretched there. And there's a wheelchair engine that Jack Gant gave us.
Yes.
He was a very good friend of ours.
Yes.
And he gave us the wheelchair engine. And so we used it on a couple of occasions, well, a few occasions at home for raising money for things too.
Yes.
But he gave us that anyway, and he loved this because he loved quirky things like this. He really liked it. He's a very good friend of Gordon's. And so anyway, when he started to construct this, I can't remember where he got these wheels from, but there are bits of our house in this.
Yes.
There are old pumps. One day I came home and went upstairs and found that there were actually no knobs on my iron bed.
Okay.
I had a lovely black
I can
bed
see.
lined up. Yeah.
Yes.
All of them had gone.
Yeah.
So I ran downstairs and I said to him, and as I went in, he said, I know. He said, I need one of them.
Yeah.
I said, you don't need four. He said, no, but I have to get the screw right.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I got 3 of them back, so I have 3 in a Christmas decoration now.
You see,
And then
I remember
there it
this
is.
being exhibited as part of a public exhibition,
Yes.
which was a tribute to Gordon.
It was,
and we
yes.
had an audience with Gordon, which he was very reluctant to have, and it was a real celebration of his creativity and of Rachel's as well. And I remember on the night people could give donations to,
Yes.
I think it was the Motor Neuron
It was.
a charity, and it was just a joy to see. And every time I think of Gordon, and I can just visualise him in that space,
Yes.
I think of a cross between Michael Bentine, which shows my age, and Monty Python.
Well,
Because
yes,
it was like
yes.
something completely surreal,
Yes,
in
it was,
terms
yes,
of what
it
he
was.
did,
And I mean, his inspiration for things was amazing. But he used a lot of things. We used, well, our youngest son said that whenever he was the only man he knew who went out to the dump in an empty trailer.
Yes.
And usually people take things
Yes.
away. But anyway, he dressed the girls. One of the things that people found very odd, if anyone came to talk to us, I remember RTE came up and did a film on it.
Uh-huh.
The guy said to him, who does the costumes?
Yeah.
And Gordon said, I do the costumes.
Yeah.
And he said, do you do all this sewing? And Gordon said, yes, of course I do. Why?
Even the very trimming,
Yeah.
the hair,
Exactly.
everything
Yes,
is used.
trimming on the collars and things. And he said, yes, of course I do. And he said, the hats? He said, yes. And he said, oh. He said, why? And he said, well, I don't know really, but he said, it just seems odd. I would have thought you would get a seamstress. And he said to him, think about tailors.
Yeah, yeah. But when you look at as well as the work in the museum, which we've been looking
yes,
at as
yes.
well, and the attention to detail,
yes.
and the social history piece, that's a very significant part.
Yes, it is.
But it's not just about his creative mind, but also his genius. And I noticed, particularly that night, what struck me was even more so than ever before, his humility. Because he really didn't want the attention.
No, he didn't.
He was
He didn't
creating
like
these
it at all.
fantastical things, but he really didn't want the
No, he
attention.
didn't.
And when we kind of pushed him to talk about it, he was so humble because he thought no one would be interested to listen.
Well, it's just he didn't really
and we
like doing public
completely were
speaking much.
absorbed
Yes.
by it. And that struck me because we had the exhibition was in the Higher Bridges Gallery in the centre,
Yes, I remember
and
that.
downstairs we had a screening of footage of different programmes and different profiles,
Yes,
some of
that's
which
right.
was the RTE piece,
It was,
the other
yes.
piece from BBC as well and UTV,
Yes.
and it just showed his quirkiness and his personality, but most of all his sense of humour.
Yeah.
I know,
and
that was lovely to
it
witness.
was lovely, and he would love the fact that whenever we had to start working on it had sat outside in
Yeah.
the workshop, I suppose since the 70s really.
Yeah.
And it didn't suffer from it at all. I'm amazed that the costumes are so good.
And that they haven't gone mouldy.
Exactly.
But I know you've gifted quite a bit of Gordon's work, and it's a beautiful legacy. And we talked earlier about the bursary and
Yeah.
what you want
Yes,
to do
we're
as
going
part
to
of a
do
living
that,
legacy.
yes,
And I
yes.
think that's lovely. But I think it's an incredibly generous thing to gift this to a public space, which is the Butter Market here in Enniskillen, the Craft and Design Centre, and it's a very fitting place. But and I do remember when it was launched here, it was a family occasion very much
so, yes,
and
it
you
was.
had of course your grandchildren
Yes, I
involved
did.
as
Well,
well.
we always had a big thing about getting dressed up. We had parties and
Yes.
things, and so we had that dressed up. And Colin from the museum, it was him that made this possible, really, because by the time the 70s came, or by the time we got out of the 70s, 80s, 90s,
Yes.
2000s, There were lots of bits broken and not being very well, and if you started it up, you had no idea whether things would blow up or whatever. So Colin took it over, and he's a conservator, and he made an amazing job of it. But the thing about him doing it was that he did it as Gordon would have done it. He could have done it with computers, and that would have been no good. And maybe one day that'll have to be, because it'll just die off, you know. But it was lovely, and so that was where the idea for the bursary came from. We're going to call it for the Imagineer of the Year, and every year a student in Fermanagh schools will be able to put something in for this. We're not going to have it as part of the exams.
Yes, well that's good.
Yes, and it can be anything. It can be anything as long as it's imaginative and quirky, really, because it's the quirkiness that's lovely, and the fact that there are 3 demure young ladies driving this whacking great train is lovely. The fact that there are bits of things like copper boilers and pumps and bed knobs, broomsticks, and all sorts of things on this. And I remember Colin coming to the door once, and he said, "Look," and he held out his hand, and in his hand there was a zip, and he said, "This is how he was making whatever bit of it work." But he wasn't an electrician. He didn't know about things like that. So
but I know that you were so grateful and had huge trust in Colin's work, because he was doing it as Gordon would, respectfully,
his head,
but also from a health and safety point of view, which was very important, because you don't want the whole thing to combust.
No, definitely
now,
not.
I know both of us have a thing about robins.
Yes, we have.
And I know that I
have to
came
show
across
you this.
something that I thought you would
Well,
enjoy.
this is the little Steampunk Robin, and this little Steampunk Robin you got for me, and we decided we would put her on the train, because she looked so right. And she just sits there, and when children come and look at this, you suddenly see them and they say, "Oh, there's a bird." And you say, "Well, of course, you know, she's standing still." And it's lovely to have the robin. And the robin, of course, come to the house, and they know everything, really.
Yes, and there is something too about the connection with those that we love, that are still in our lives in different forms as well.
But it's lovely having it here, because it means that if people come to the town, we can come down and have a coffee. And then at 11 o'clock, you suddenly hear, I can't do this today because obviously during lockdown it's difficult to and it makes the noise of the train going out of the station. And it's lovely because people don't go like this, and they look to see where it is. And they can't work it out. By the time they've got here, it's stopped.
Because it is very discreet, even though it's taken up quite a bit. And then I know that you negotiated your way through with Fermanagh District Council about the sort of environment that you wanted this to be displayed in. That people could see it literally from 3 sides, obviously. We're beside Ken and Anne's studios here, and we're just across from Rebecca's coffee shop. So it's in a beautiful part of the courtyard, and for all ages and generations to enjoy.
It is.
And I know that we've been down a few times having a coffee, and we've overheard people talk about this, and then they're delighted obviously to meet you, because you're connected obviously and the source of many creative things.
And I think this year it'll be, tourism is going to be very important in Fermanagh. And I think having something a little bit different is a lovely idea. And quite a lot of people that I know have got really good ideas about things that might be done, and the boats are coming on now and everything. It's lovely to think that that's part of it, and he would love
absolutely
that.
And I think now really more than ever, Tony, we've had this conversation before, because we're both arts educationists as well, the importance of our own creativity and our own self-expression, particularly at this time because of our mental health and well-being as well. And I think that we're lucky to be in the beautiful part of the world. The Buddha Market is a gorgeous space. It's the perfect space for this. I mean, literally, you can come to the Buddha Market, go to the museum, and enjoy Gordon's work in so many different scales as well.
Absolutely.
You know.
I know it's lovely. I'm delighted to have it here. I just think it's lovely. We're going to do up the lamppost out there with little notices, ladies' waiting room, and all that sort of thing.
Because lots of signage.
Nice, very discreet, because these ladies, upset them. They would have to be, because
the lovely thing about the launch that you had with the family here, that you had Elaine and Jane were down here, the 2 past students.
Yeah, Jane and Sandra.
Jane and Sandra.
And I know it was lovely, and they loved it. And they had Sandra had her children with her. She's a teacher, And they couldn't believe it, you know, really. And it was lovely. It was very nice. And I had my grandchildren dressed up, and the little boy Sean was pushing the trolley, the station trolley.
Oh, he was very impressive, and Jessie as well.
Yes, they took it very solemnly. We did want to dress her up as a Victorian girl, but there was no chance because she got a Frozen set.
Oh yeah, well
you
go with it.
So, yes, you do, yes.
Well, Toni, thanks a million for telling us about this. Most of all, thank you for the gift that you've given to Enniskillen, and I know that there'll be many generations that will enjoy this.
I hope so. Yes.
For many, many years to come.
So Toni, we are so lucky to be here, Toni, during lockdown. I mean, the views here are spectacular.
Oh, amazing,
you know?
And there's always somewhere to go for a walk. And I know it's lovely. It's a beautiful place. Doesn't the castle look amazing?
It looks absolutely beautiful. And Toni, thank you very much for today. Thank you for taking us in round.
I enjoyed it. And I always enjoy talking about the shop and things as well. It's lovely. And I love it when you see lots of people going down there and they're so enthralled, and Catherine doing, I don't know, I think it's great the way they do. I love those reenactments that they do.
Yes.
We'll have to do some more of those.
Yes, and I think this whole idea of living history.
Yes.
And I think, Toni, given that hopefully we're coming out of lockdown and preparing, I suppose, for a sort of new normality, let's look forward to good health.
Absolutely.
And good...
Indeed.
Good fun.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Distantly.
Distantly.